What really struck me today in the voices from across the country is that New York City is not the only place that's struggling with issues of equitable development, displacement, and neighborhood change. And that's why we brought partners from other cities, because there's a lot to be learned from each other.
The event is important because it's important just to recognize and acknowledge that displacement is real, that is a real threat confronting communities, and that until we kind of acknowledge it as a real threat, we're not going to be able to define the proactive set of solutions.
One of the opening speakers, Kai Wright, I appreciated that he was emphasizing that the people who live in a community are its assets. It shouldn't just be looked at as like a set of parcels of land that have a certain value, but instead it's the people who live there that give it its value.
The opportunity is to redefine the conversation. From our perspective, it's to bring the concept of housing back to the concept of home, which is something that Kai Wright mentioned in his opening remarks. He bought a house, and people don't talk about his buying a house as his having a new home. It was an investment, right? And we've gotten completely caught up in this concept of housing as a means of investment and a means of return.
Today, we're looking at neighborhoods, and I think in a very different way. It's never exclusively a physical boundary. I think we heard some of that today, where we talked about where people feel comfortable and safe, and where they knew that they had friends and family who they could interact with and find common ground. And that's their neighborhood, whether it was a block or 2 blocks or 6 blocks, that's their neighborhood. And I think in a lot of ways, that's what people really want. They want to be able to go to school, they want to be able to work, they want to be able to live in an area they feel comfortable.
What's happening today is not divorced from what has happened to neighborhoods and communities in the past, right? And that the connection to redlining, to the foreclosure crisis, to the flight out of our cities and certain populations and neighborhoods is very much tied to what people are experiencing in their neighborhoods now in terms of displacement and development.
It's a very complicated issue, right? And I think that if we can have conversations like this, where people who are practitioners and policy experts come together, and then we find strategies to get it out into the community so that there's a broader movement for equitable community development, that would be awesome.
It drove home today the concept of listening to the residents and understanding the residents in a neighborhood and what they're going through, and that we should never forget that is the underlying purpose of what we do in affordable housing and community development finance, is to improve the lives of the residents of the neighborhoods.
The researchers, I think, was kind of interested. Obviously, they're not your typical researchers who are laid back. These folks are out there talking to people, so they're not clearly just relying on empirical data that they find in reports and studies and such. They're out there talking to people, and I think that conversation is an important part, because I believe it influences their research and the things that they then report on.
I think it's so amazing how we've been able to hear from people and leaders from all of the different cities, and the problems that we're facing really aren't unique, and we need to think about comprehensive solutions, not only at the local level, but coming from the national level to solve them.
I'd say that one of the best things about this conference is you have people from various parts of the development sector come together here. For-profit developers, nonprofit developers, government officials, foundations, and banks come together to have this dialogue and discussion about how we can address displacement and gentrification, and how we can address market pressures that are forcing so many people out of communities. Having that dialogue, to me, is the first step to creating policy change.
Looking out at this room of peers and colleagues and fellow travelers, we have such a robust civic sector in New York City, from city and state government, government at all levels, financial institutions, foundations, nonprofits. We've done this work together. We've rebuilt neighborhoods that were devastated by redlining and disinvestment. We fought through the foreclosure crisis and the financial crisis that followed. We came together to rebuild after Hurricane Sandy. We've done this before. I think the question before us is, can we bring the same level of urgency to this question of what city do we want to build for the next generation?